manager of Sage Therapeutics, where we're extremely proud to be a sponsor of this year's Men of Color Conference. I know it's a little after lunch, so we're going to bring up a lot of energy. We're a life sciences panel, so I'm going to be bringing life. I think that's the goal, is we're going to bring a little life today and try to make sure no one's sleeping after lunch. I'm very excited to be with you today, along with this esteemed group of life science professionals, as we discuss our topic of advancing men of color, holding ourselves, organizations, and society accountable. So before we get into the discussion, let's introduce our panelists. Fred LOWRY, he's a Senior Vice President and President for Thermo Fisher Scientific's Customer Channels Business. And I think his role is expanded just recently, but I'll let him talk about that one. Dr. Chris REDDICK, VP, Head of R&D Health Equity at Takeda Pharmaceuticals. Ken Turner's the President and CEO of Mass Life Sciences Center. THEO Hills, the Medical Director, Global Strategy and Med Affairs over at Vertex down at the Seaport. So thank you, gentlemen. Thank you all for joining the discussion. So let's begin. I want to frame this in two parts, and we kind of discussed this already: workforce and community and patients. Because since March 2020, being a person of color in this industry, in life sciences, has been really tough. With the pandemic uprooting the routine of work and placing a spotlight on health inequities of communities of color regarding clinical trials and vaccine distribution. But I think the tipping point was in May following the murder of George Floyd by a white police officer. This prompted a global response from protests on the streets to companies making general statements in support of the Black Lives Matter movement, anti-racism efforts. And as you know, we're at home, so you can hear my alarm as my wife is taking my dog out. This prompted a global response, right? So making general statements in support of Black Lives Matter movement and anti-racism efforts, and a more equitable and diverse workforce from CEOs and board of directors that spans across business verticals. So before we dig into each of the subjects I discussed, how about we discuss generally, and this is the open question to anyone, the impacts that COVID-19 and America's racial awakening have had on the life sciences industry? And are those changes here to stay? I'll let anyone take it. Or I can pull people out. How about Dr. Reddick? Chris, how about you start?
Yeah, I was just trying to get myself unmuted. So thanks, Taylor. And I want to thank Emerson for inviting me to the conference this year. This is my first year to the conference, and just a pleasure to be on the panel with these brothers and the rest of the conference these last couple of days. This is the time that we need to be doing this, so I'm happy to be a part of this. You talk about the perfect storm, right? The COVID and the America's racial awakening, so to speak, and the events that happened last year. It feels like it's a continuation, right? So we keep talking about last year, but last year feels like this year, and this year is going to feel like next year, right? So this is a continuum in my mind. It definitely got people's attention in the life sciences and healthcare. I think it kind of ripped open a Band-Aid and pulled back a cover to just lay bare all the inequities that we've been talking about for 20 plus years in the industry: lack of representation in the company, lack of representation in both researchers and patients in clinical trials and the work we do. It just laid all that bare for folks to look at, and it was stark. So I think we got the attention of really all the stakeholders, from the C-suite on down, government, every sector that's involved in healthcare. I think we got their attention, and I think you are seeing momentum. So we've gone from that moment last year to some momentum. But I think what we can talk about on this panel is how to keep that momentum going. That's the thing that keeps me awake at night, is what happens in next year and the year after that, right? Is this an upward trending curve that's going to go on for a while, or are we just looking at ebbs and flows? So that's kind of been my perspective on the last couple of years.
Chris, I would completely echo that, because we've seen an increase in exposure, recognition of ID&E issues and initiatives. However, with that spotlight, I think we have some momentum, but I think it's going to be really key to see how we can increase that. Meaning that has to be a combination between industry, between leaders, and between the community. So forming a partnership between those three entities can help move forward the ideas and initiatives that have been placed in the last year. And I think that's going to be critical. And just like Chris, I am very happy to be on this esteemed panel with these brothers, and happy to see how we can actually move this needle forward so that folks can be able to have equitable healthcare and good outcomes.
You know, and by the way, I'm happy to be on the panel as well with such a great group of brothers, and I'm really impressed with all the work that you guys are doing. You know, when I think about this question, though, I think it started with COVID. You know, the level of visibility that the life science industry has gotten because of COVID is actually really important. I think it's an important opportunity for us. And then when you add the impact of COVID on the Black community, it just really highlights the impact of the lack of diversity and equity and all the issues that we have as a life science community. And then when you throw on top of that the murder of George Floyd, I think it really created a situation where, hey, what are we going to do about it? And I think it's really up to us, quite frankly, to continue to keep the ball moving forward. I actually have seen some really great things since then, but I think it's up to us to make sure that we institutionalize those things in our own companies, but in our industry, and with public and private partnerships. So I think it's really important to keep the ball moving, and we have a real role to play on it. So I'm glad we're having that discussion today.
And to add to that, let me say, you know, what a privilege it is to be with you guys this afternoon, and thank Emerson and Paul for bringing us together and for, you know, kind of kicking off this conversation. But to Fred's point, in the 10 months that I've been in my role, right, which is you know, public sector government piece of the public-private partnership, you know, as I've gone around and met with the leadership of the various industry partners throughout our ecosystem here in the Commonwealth, as well as my partners at Mass Bio and Mass Medic, I've been really encouraged by the conversations, because a lot of the conversation has centered on diversity without me bringing it up. I mean, it's just part of the conversation. Now, to Chris's point, Fred's point, you know, I don't know, you know, how long that lasts, you know, but what I'm encouraged by is that, you know, it seems to me that there's an earnest attempt in the conversations, at least that I've been in, to really take a step back, understand the issues, and try to figure out how we can come up with really creative and sustainable solutions, which to me is the way you go about this, rather than just simply putting a Band-Aid on it, throwing a little money at it, you know, giving a few speeches and moving on. So I guess I'd sum it up by saying, in the 10 months that I've been in my role and I've been getting out, meeting with various stakeholders and industry partners, you know, to Chris's point, a lot of the conversation evolves around workforce and the fact that we need to have more diversity there. A lot of the conversation evolves around board leadership and executive leadership, C-suite leadership within the life sciences. And in fact, just yesterday, I mean, the announcement came out in the DBJ that the long leading CEO at Alnylam is retiring, and his replacement will be a Black female, which I think is, you know, a wonderful sign of the possibilities of what we can achieve within our ecosystem here in the Commonwealth if we're intentional about it. So, and I think that that's the key. We have to remain focused. We have to be intentional.
Totally agree. Before I was going to go to another question, but let me ask this question. We're all leaders in the organization and life science organizations, but we're also strapped. I mean, we probably have 2 or 3 jobs at the most. How do you handle being the person trying to be the baton carrier for diversity, bringing more people, doing more initiatives, and handling those with everything else going on? How do we make this this livable? How do we make this work without us or with us? And how do they give us more bandwidth to handle a situation like this.
Yeah, Taylor, let me just, I'm itching to jump in on this one because last year was, I'm just tired. That's what I could tell you, right? I think we all were. You know, I think our corporations, I remember getting the text message on the weekend after George Floyd's murder and things were really heating up. Got a text message from, you know, one of our senior leaders saying, you know, I'd like to talk to you about what we're going to do. From that point to now, I've been included in discussions, roundtables, senior leader thinking, webinars, trainings, and that's not my day job, right? So my day job is health equity during the day, trying to move our trials forward and other things. So I think that's been a big challenge. What you're bringing up right now is the weight that was put on the Black community to say, hey, help us fix this, right? We know it's been going on for 20 plus years, but now we really want to take this serious, but turning to the people who've been bearing the weight the most to try to fix this. So that's been tough. So what I found successful is, one, using that as an opportunity to say we need more people of color in this organization, right? One or two people, you can't have one head here, one head there, one VP here. You really need to bring on more. This is an opportunity to diversify the organization and using that as leverage to say you want to get these things done. But also, we're starting to have this dialogue about it's not just Black folks' problem to fix these issues. And so who within the organization is going to be assigned this work like any other work is assigned, right? So in our part of the world, right, it's all about the pipeline, bringing new medicines forward. People get assigned to that work. That's what they do, and that's what they dedicate themselves to. Who are the non-people of color who are going to dedicate it and be assigned to this work to make it successful? So I think it's those two things that are really going to kind of keep us going and not just completely wear out the limited leadership that we have in these companies right now.
Chris, I couldn't agree with you more. I think it's really about making it a business priority. And when I say a business priority, I mean it's going to deliver results for the business. So, and when you do that, it has to become a part of how we hold our business leaders accountable. And it's not a few of us working on this part-time. It's really the companies, or in that case, my company, deciding that this is going to make us better. It's going to make our culture better. It's going to make us deliver better for our customers. It's going to be good for the communities we live in, and ultimately good for our shareholders. And if we don't treat it that way, it won't last. That's really the point. It won't last because we'll have other priorities that will trump it. And so that's been the focus internally for us, is that we've made this a business priority. It's part of us building a culture and having great talent. It's part of our talent strategy, and we believe that diverse teams perform better. So, and if you don't believe that, you should go read the Diversity Matters study that McKinsey did, and where they prove it. So I think that's where I start with this. Is we can't make it our burden. It's something that I love doing, and I'm happy to be out front of it. But the real work is making sure that it's a part of the company's overall strategy.
Completely agree with you guys, that perspective. Just to add just a bit of color to that, wanted to also throw in and say that it's also about momentum. We reached a point to where people in companies are using their voices to push initiatives. However, that amplification of those voices creates momentum where other folks will join in, even though we all are wearing a multiplicity of hats in our day job, and we're all a little tired and all a little exhausted from having the conversations. But this is what we're here for. This is exactly why we've risen to the levels of leadership that we've risen, to be able to create those opportunities for folks coming behind us and to be able to open those doors and be able to push this forward is only an example of us being able to do that. So as everyone has jumped in to say, the partnerships, the people, and the companies moving this forward is going to be key.
Very true.
Taylor, can I just add one more thought on that? And one thing I'm encouraged by is the focus on ESG. So if you think about where shareholders are going, and shareholders are focused on environmental, social governance, and diversity and inclusion is a part of that. And so public companies are getting very serious about ESG, and DE&I is going to be a part of that going forward. So I think that's a real positive, and it really creates some sustainability, as it relates to the focus in this area.
And just as we talk about leadership and things like that, I know that Black people, we account for only about 3.2% of senior leadership roles at large companies in the country, and less than 1% of all Fortune 500 CEO positions. And one of those CEO positions that I think accounted for that number was Ken Frazier, the former CEO of Merck. But some companies over the last year, as we kind of discussed, decided to set quantifiable goals on changing their hiring practices and the businesses they work with. And we know, as I think some of you already mentioned, the studies show that diverse executive teams are more likely to outperform their peers on profitability. But how do you think your organization or organizations in this industry should address the diversity gap within their leadership ranks? And I'm more so talking about senior leadership. What are the development barriers and opportunities for Black talent to advance to these leadership positions? So I think I'll start with Ken on this one.
Well, I was hoping you'd pitch it to one of these guys, but go right. But I'll take it. So as I talk with Mass Bio, right, you've got basically on their board. I just met with their board about a week or so ago, and as I said, I'm meeting with my good friend Joe Bunkari and Kendall O'Brien next up this afternoon. We got a conversation coming up. But what I'm hearing, from their board, and if you think about it, the members of their board, which are basically the executive leadership of every major biopharmaceutical company in Massachusetts is represented on their board. They are brutally aware of the fact that they've got to do much better when it comes to DE&I. The issue, though, as you might imagine, is that, it's all about pipeline and how do you build up a robust pipeline of talent such that when the opportunities come along, you've got a pool to draw from. And so, I'm kind of saying that to say this is I recognize and they recognize that it's a heavy lift, that you're not going to solve this overnight. There isn't a silver bullet. But I think programs like, Project On-Ramp or the Earnest E-Just initiative that we're sponsoring with UNCF, where we're going to reach out and bring a cohort of interns from HBCUs around the country to Boston next summer. Our industry partners have signed up to take these interns into their companies for the duration of the summer, along with providing them a company mentor and a community mentor, et cetera, et cetera. So it's programs like that I think start to move us in the right direction to develop that pipeline. But I would submit that in the end, it's going to take time. I mean, this is not something you can't. I'm from Louisiana. There's a country song that says you can't make old friends, right? And what that means is you can't just wave a wand and just make it happen. You've got to invest in it. You got to respect that, you've got to be intentional and you've got to stay focused. And that's how you build the pipeline over time. But this is not, in my view, something that we're going to solve, within the short frame. This is a long-term investment of energy, time, and resources.
Totally agree. Anyone else want to jump on? I'm going to take this. Oh, there, good.
Yeah, no, Fred, why don't you go first?
I'm happy to yield to you if you like, but I agree with Ken's point. You've got to have a pipeline. And by the way, one stat you didn't say is 10% of college graduates are Black. So in this country, so you'd see the drop off happens early. It happens. It's not that we keep saying, hey, we can't find enough STEM folks. That's not the case. We're not attracting them to our industry, and we're not attracting them to our industry because they don't see an opportunity to be successful. And so I think in order to get a pipeline, you really got to make sure you identify resources early and you don't weed them out too soon. And that includes in the hiring process. And my focus around accelerating this is a little bit different. It's really focusing on majority. If we want to improve the pace of developing diverse talent, then it's up to the people who are holding the means of power right now. So that means we should be focusing on the managers, the frontline supervisors, the folks who are identifying talent early in the organization to make sure that they are developing that talent so that we do have a really strong pipeline. And then the other thing is we have to really create a great inclusive environment where people can be their very best selves and they don't leave the organization or don't leave the industry because they don't see a place for them to be successful. And I don't think that's a long-term thing. I think it's a short-term thing. If you think about retention of Blacks, I bet if we looked at those stats, we would not be excited about them. So I think that's another opportunity, and that will make a difference at the middle management level and create even a bigger pool for folks moving into executive and senior executive positions today. So I think there's work that we can do short term to create a better environment, and that's about sponsorship and making sure that people get the opportunities when they become available. Based on their capabilities. And so I think that's a real opportunity for us right now.
Chris,
Yeah,
if you don't mind, let me jump in real quick because I want to tap into Fred and maybe you can build off of this. I think the thing that's also there, when you said 10% of college graduates are Black, the other problem is, I know Chris, you're in Chicago. I'm now in Atlanta. I'm back to Atlanta, and I came from Boston. The issue is also location. A lot of these jobs in our industry are in the Boston area. So you got new college graduates who more than likely don't have connections in the Boston, the Cambridge area. And then you want them to take their maybe low salaries or wherever the salaries are to find a place up in Boston where they don't know anyone to hopefully get maybe a job or an internship. There's a big gap there. And I lived in Cambridge, so I know that when I walked around, I didn't see that many people that look like me. So I'm assuming that maybe there's not a lot of connections there. How do we, on a real tangible basis, how do we actually expect people from Morehouse, and I said that first for a reason, Morehouse and Spelman and Tuskegee, people from the South, people from the Midwest, how do you bring those people up to the Northeast, of a place where, I've heard horror stories about Boston before I moved up there 4 years ago.
I was going to pick up on a little bit. It kind of ties into what you're saying, Taylor, too, but I would pick up on what Fred was saying about the need for sponsorship, right? Not just mentorship, but true sponsorship, right? Where we're actively helping, our brothers and sisters kind of manage their careers and get into this, but it ties into that recruitment piece, right? Because if you can connect, you have a candidate who's coming, from a different place in the country, wanting to move to Boston, you can get them intentionally connected into. So what we're trying to do, connect those candidates into our Black Leadership Council. So as they're going through the interview process just for their job, we want to make sure that that's diverse too, but we want to make sure that they're talking to people in the company that look like them, who can give them perspective on living in Boston, and those kind of things. And I think that really helps. So it's that sponsorship and connectivity is the way I think we can help address some of that.
Yeah, and I'd like to go back though and kind of, repeat something I said that I probably kind of glossed over, but in concert with UNCF, we are supporting the Life Science Center is supporting an initiative called the Ernest E. Just Initiative. And that initiative we're going to pilot next summer, which speaks directly, Taylor, to what you're talking about, which is reaching out to HBCUs across the country. We're going to have a cohort of, I think it's either 25 or 30 students from HBCUs across the nation that we're going to bring to Boston. We're going to put them in housing. We're going to connect them with companies. They're going to have folks who look after them in the company as well as in the community, because we want them to have a rich in-person intern experience in Boston. so that they see that, coming to Boston isn't quite as bad as you think it is, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And by the way, I'm an HBCU grad myself from Southern University in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. So, I'm convinced that if we do this right, and this is the pilot, that if we do this right, we'll be able to scale this program up over time, and we'll go from 25 or 30 students to, the next time around 50 students, and then 80 students, and then 100 students, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I think that's how you chip away at this, is you bring people here and show them what it's like to live here. Now, having said that, I respect that when you're in the Boston, Cambridge area specifically, which is where our, R&D ecosystem is most robust, the cost of living, congestion, traffic, mass transit, all of those issues are real. And, we in government and my partners in industry have to, we have to figure out how we deal with those problems, as a separate issue, because that's not a diversity issue. That's just a, cost of living in the area that you live in, geographic issue. But nonetheless, that program I'm really excited by, because as you might imagine, this is an expensive pilot. I mean, we're bringing these kids up here on our dime. The companies are leaning in to help us pay for this. We putting them up in housing, et cetera, et cetera. This is not a virtual event. We're bringing people physically to Boston for, several months at a time next summer to try this out.
That's great. Theo, did you have something?
Taylor, just to expand on that a little bit. One thing that we've added in this environment is that we've added a virtual type of culture as well. Now, while we're accustomed to being in person, COVID-19 has changed our lives completely. And now we have the added challenges of being able to reach those mentors, reach those sponsors, and how to build those connections and relationships that will open the doors to create opportunities. So I think events like this, organizations like the Denver Dinner Group, are organizations and events where folks can come together and find and connect with folks who are doing the things that they want to do. How to manage those, how to foster those, and how to make those thrive. Now, that is a different issue altogether. But I think to Kenn's point, what he's doing with his organization is phenomenal. But adding a virtual aspect to that, I think will add another dynamic that folks may find helpful as well.
Perfect.
I also think on that topic, I think scale matters. As we talk about pipelines, I think having some scale matters so that you're not walking down the street or walking in the cafeteria. You're the only person that looks like, you don't see anybody that looks like you all day. And so one of the things that we've done at Thermo Fisher, we also have something called the JUST Project, named after Ernest C. Just. It was really started to provide COVID-19 testing to HBCUs at no cost. So we stood up 8 test labs at HBCUs and created a supply chain so that all HBCUs could take tests and send them into those labs and for results. But as a part of that, we committed to hiring 500 HBCU graduates over the next 3 years. And I'm really excited to report that 1 year in, we've hired over 200 HBCU graduates. And these are not all recent graduates. We said graduates, not interns. I think maybe 6 or 7 are interns, but 15% of the over 200 we've hired are in leadership positions. And this has created a huge amount of momentum in the company around HBCUs, around people of color. And it's really been an infusion to our employee resource groups. There are other groups that are forming so that people are not alone. Even if they're not in the same location, they've got a cohort that they can reach out to and feel connected to, and progress in a way. And then the other piece is, it's not just about us bringing in folks from HBCUs and assimilating them into the Thermo Fisher culture. That's really not the point. The point is the culture is changing because the complexion of the culture is changing, and we're having richer conversations because we've got different people in the room to have those conversations. But I think that only happens though when you do create a level of scale. When you do it in a trickle, you don't get that level of change. You really have to, take a bigger swing at it, so to speak, to make a difference.
And Fred, you took away my transition. I was going to transition you to tee it up, talk about that program anyway. So thanks for doing that already.
Sure.
So let's move over to patients, because I think we definitely hit a lot on the workforce piece. And I think if anyone's watching this, I would say that you do not have to be a Black man with glasses in order to enter the life sciences industry. I know this is an interesting representation on your screen, but you do not have to have the glasses to make it in the industry. I want to talk about patients over the last year specifically. And Fred, you talked about what Thermo Fisher did. I do want to just generally talk about how has the conversation, the distribution of the vaccine, how have your companies taking on the conversation when it comes to minorities, Black communities, improving them, and developing treatments to address the health priorities of that community? And I know, Chris, I think you want to jump at that a little bit first, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, this is such a big topic right now. I mean, my biggest fear, when I talk to Black communities here in the States, but also my work takes me to the Caribbean, to Africa, the fear of our communities being left behind with medical advancements and technology, right? So it's critical that we're, not only a part of things like clinical trials, but we're part of, the discussion we were just having, part of the making the sauce, right, so to speak. We need to be in at early research, clinical development, part of the trials, post trials as well. So that's critical. It provides our communities access to these new innovations that are coming. I mean, we're now in a new era of medical technology and developing new medicines. So we'll be there and have access to those medicines, but we'll also get the data around whether these are safe and effective for our communities and be able to communicate that to our stakeholders and families in our communities. So I think that's critical as well. What that also does too, what I think we're starting to find is once it all ties together, right? This is a holistic approach. We started off by talking about increasing the representation of Black and brown people in the life sciences and in the healthcare industry. But what that starts to do is input into those early programs so that we start asking the health equity questions earlier, and it gets those teams thinking about how is this druggable target, and as we develop a medicine against it, how will it be useful in a variety of communities, including Black and brown communities. So if we can get that question and those discussions happening right at the beginning, even before you just start designing a drug, but when you're looking at targets, that's where we're going to start seeing it different. We're doing programs now where we're looking at diversifying our genomic databases that we use to identify targets. Those are incredibly not diverse, right? We've relied on, as an industry, probably the same European biobanks for the last 20 years to identify even targets for new medicines. So to me, it's all connected. Getting Black and brown folks into our industry and as early as possible starts to raise those questions, and you will start to get better inclusion into trials, that access to the medicines, better medicines that meet the needs of our community. So it's all connected in my mind.
Theo, from a medical affairs perspective, I know you probably have some thoughts on this.
Yeah, I think there are a couple of things. I think we need to do a better job with underrepresented minorities and underserved communities participating in clinical trials. Even though the FDA has provided guidance that minorities and women should be included in clinical trials, and the NIH has a mandate for the inclusion as well, we still have not reached the bar. And so I think one way that we can actually bridge that gap is for companies not only, and Ken spoke to this a little bit earlier, for companies not just to throw a couple of dollars, but I think time is critically important. So communities really understand whether or not you're really invested or not. So giving of your time as well as giving dollars, I think will go a long way to get buy-in from communities that are underserved, to be able to allow them to bring down those guards of mistrust, to be able to be included in clinical trials along with the mandates. I think there is a new section in the FDA that is geared towards health equity. And they have established guidance and education materials for underrepresented minority populations to be able to be included in clinical trials. I think the dissemination and democratizing that information is going to be critically important to make sure that folks understand how they can be a part of the change, be part of medicine, science, and actually improve the outcomes for diseases that impact our populations.
Definitely, definitely. Ken, Fred, you want to jump in? I know we got about 5 minutes left. Okay, there you go, Fred.
No, I was just coming off mute. I think those brothers covered it really well. But it is a relationship. It's not a one and done kind of a thing. You have to build relationship and build credibility, and then also we have to partner with organizations that have credibility in the Black community, which I think HBCU is a great place to start. I'm excited to see Howard University announce the creation of a research center focused on health equity. And, those type of partnerships, I think, will allow us to have equity within this community and do some of the things that the guys just addressed, whether it's genomic databases that are more diverse, or more diversity in clinical trials, or even which treatments we choose to, or which targets we choose to develop treatments for.
Definitely, and we get to engage the community well before we start doing clinical trials. Chris?
Yeah, Taylor, if I could just add on, Theo, Fred, I love those comments. One of the things, I think there's a growing dialogue going on in our industry about, the clinical trial diversity discussion has been very much a one-way discussion, right? How can we get more of our Black and brown communities in our trials? But, each of us go home, this afternoon and talk to people in your community about what's on the top of your mind, right? Being in a clinical trial is not at the top of their mind, right? There's a lot of other things that are pressing, jobs, the list is long, food security, violence in the neighborhood. So we need, as an industry, I think, to have a different value proposition. And that is, how can this clinical trial bring value to the company long-term, right? And not just for the 2 years we're doing the trial, but if I could show you that doing a trial is not only going to give you access to new innovative medicines, but it's going to improve employment. We create more patient navigators or study coordinators in that community, so that young folks who are doing STEM type of degrees, or even in high school, have a way to bridge into those clinical trials. If we connected those kind of synergies, how can clinical trials improve transportation in a community? So you've heard of companies who are partnering with Uber and other transportation companies to say, hey, during the trial, we partner with Uber to help get you to the trial. But maybe that should be more long-term, right? That, hey, we're going to be doing trials in this community for the next 5 or 10 years. So Uber, what can we do about transportation to healthcare clinics when we're not doing the trial? So you see what I mean? It's like changing that dynamic of just saying, hey, how can you help us reach a goal that is ultimately going to be good for you, but down the line, but now starting to say, this experience is a two-way street. Doing these trials together is going to bring value to the community in the short term and the long term. So I think that's an important kind of dynamic that we need to start thinking about.
Definitely. And with the presence of Paul, I think we're about to transition over to Q&A. I want to thank you, gentlemen, for a great discussion. So Paul's on you. I think you're on mute, Paul.
Taylor, thank you. Fred, Chris, Theo, Ken, this has been great conversation. And I think what I'm gathering from all the questions is really around, and I'm going to post these questions to you all. It's really around not only the pipeline issue that we have, but it's actually process, meaning there are a lot of folks that are frustrated around the process of applying to jobs, being able to get in, being able to have a conversation. So can you please speak to, from your perspective, what are companies doing differently? What are your companies doing differently, or your organizations today, to make sure that there is an amplification of how these talent can come into your organization? Because this seems to be, from the questions, a lot of frustration around people not being able to get a foot in the door, even talk to a recruiter. So if you can speak to that, I think that'll be great.
Paul, I can go first on that. I would say it's all about connections. Hiring managers tend to hire people that they're comfortable with, right? So being in a situation to where you can connect, be mentored, and have sponsors is critically important. I know it can be incredibly frustrating to simply apply to a job on a board or LinkedIn, and then have limited success at those efforts. However, another tactic to go about that is finding someone in that company that you can connect with to build a relationship with before just, clicking send on an application. Try to reach out to someone in that organization to establish a contact, and/or reach into your network to see if they have connections at that company as well. That goes a long way with helping bring down the barriers that exist for people to get in the door. Now, once you're in the door to get an interview, other factors come into play. And I think companies need to do a better job with giving folks from underrepresented minority populations adequate positions and adequate pay. I think that's critically important as well, because we've also seen it in different organizations that sometimes people don't get offered those best opportunities. So I think there's a multiplicity of issues, but I think reaching out, making connections, and having people that you can network with is critically important.
I think just to double tap what Theo just said, it's also the other way of that too, is that a lot of these companies, especially life sciences companies, have big referral bonuses. So a lot of people who don't look like us refer their friends, refer their former colleagues, and they normally get the fast track to the interview and are preferred throughout the process. So the thing is, if it's not that many minorities in the company, we don't have that many, we don't have the ability to refer every single person we know to every single job there is, and there's a cap to that too. So it's just it's really the HR groups, or the people in experience groups, who have to be more intentional with their hiring practices and how they look at the referrals coming in.
Yeah, and I think, thank you, Taylor, because I think that's the part that I want to sort of dig deeper in. Theo, your answer is great in terms of, absolutely, those are things that we should be thinking about doing, right? Who do I know, or who do I don't know that I could get close to potentially be able to serve as a source of referral, or connect me to someone who can help me at least get a foot in the door. But I think from a systemic perspective, we need to fix, how companies go out and either try to recruit talent, attract talent, or get them through the pipeline. And so are there any novel ways that your companies are doing this differently? And then I'll come back, Ken, to the question around the HBCU pipeline. There's a question here, which I think is also important. But so is there anything that, Takeda, Thermo Fisher, and, that are doing to do something different?
One of the things that we're doing is we're requiring diverse slates. So if you're a hiring manager, you are working with your talent acquisition partner saying, hey, I need a diverse slate for position X. The other thing that we're also doing is looking at the pipeline and how candidates progress through the pipeline based on their diversity. So if we're seeing a large shakeout at the beginning of a particular, then we can go and solve that problem. Or people make it all the way through to the hiring manager, and we're seeing a specific issue that way we can solve that problem. And so it's really about how we manage anything else. We're measuring ourselves and measuring putting measures in the process, and then holding our managers accountable for having diverse slates, and that has proven to make a real difference when you manage it from a just manage it like you're managing the other process.
Yeah, agree. We put that in place as well, and I think it's definitely, and I know that a lot of companies are doing that now, which is good to see. Chris, anything on your end?
Yeah, I would just add to that. I mean, these are all great ideas. I'm taking down some of these notes as well. We're doing a lot of these things as well. But, you know, I mentioned earlier, one of the things that really has gotten some traction recently is connecting our African American employee resource group to the recruitment and hiring process, right? So this used to be something that didn't touch that organization at all. That we've got, you know, almost 1,000 Black and brown folks in that organization. So now they have partnered more closely with talent recruitment and hiring and said, okay, when jobs come available, we want to get those too. So you're going to post them on your LinkedIn, your websites, and go where you go. But we're going to get those, and we're going to use our network. And many of our employees in our Black Leadership Council went to HBCUs. They have a better network. You couldn't buy that network, right? So they have the network. They're sending out those open jobs directly to their network. And then as people are applying, they're coming back through and saying, I want to let you know I applied for that job. They let the employee resource group know, and they're kind of tracking that and holding the organization a bit accountable, right? They're saying, hey, I know a colleague of mine applied for that position. Where is that? You know, and that's coming from the employee resource group. So I think it's things like that, in addition to diversifying the candidate pool, as well as measures to diversify the review groups who are looking at these candidates and ultimately making the decisions.
General question, perhaps the last one. It's tough to understand how life sciences entities have missed the bus regarding patient diversity. Why did it take this to have an aha moment? So, you know, makes us question motivation. So what are your thoughts there as to why we missed the boat in terms of life sciences organizations making patient diversity a priority?
And you're just saying a patient diversity in all aspects of whether it's trials, things like that. I mean, I can give you some of my thoughts on that to start off with. I think it's a combination. You know, one of the conversations I've been having recently is, you know, how do we get to this situation with COVID, right? And a lot of it is, to me, we communicate with the community in fits and starts, right? So I was just talking to an organization, said we did so much great work with HIV/AIDS in the Black and brown community in the 80s and 90s. We got information out there. We dispelled rumors. Then in places like Africa, they've done a fantastic job leveraging the HIV/AIDS platform to talk about cervical cancer and the HPV vaccines. So countries like Rwanda have 98% vaccination for HPV, whereas here in the States, we have about 40%. But the common theme is that the industry is constantly connecting with and talking to the community, not just when there's a need to do so. So there's been kind of a gap between, say, the communications around HIV/AIDS and maybe hypertension to now, right? So 10, 15-year gap, and then you try to start from the beginning again, right? So one of the important things that we're trying to figure out and work with different constituents, HBCUs, the Urban League and others, is how do we talk about healthcare on an everyday basis with our community so that when these kind of things pop, we're just pivoting a little bit. But I'm not talking to you about why vaccines are important now. I talked to you about that when we did the HPV cycle 10 years ago, right? So I think that leads to some, right, is a big piece of how do we do this, and why we missed the boat in these last recent years is we have not been connected as well as we should be to the community.
I'm going to have to cut it off there for us since we're going to transition to the next panel, which is the healthcare panel. But I really want to thank all of you for everything you're doing in your respective organizations and everything you're doing in our community at large to make sure that we have more people that look like us represented in your industry. And I think it's critically important. So thank you. Thank you for the insights, and good to see you all. So we'll move on to the next panel. So thank you. Great conversation. Taylor, great job moderating as well.